Hundreds of activists are expected to march to the Union building this morning to demand an end to the violence, the threats and the intimidation aimed at them and whistleblowers. Activists, community members and civil society organizations are planning to deliver a memorandum addressed to the President, Ministers of Police and Justice and their respective portfolio committee chairs. So it's shaping up to be a massive moment in the fight for proper whistleblower protection and compensation. Social justice activist John Clark joins us now to explore the context and expectations of today's events. John, good morning. Welcome. Thank you, as always, for your time. Why is this march happening today? What are the series of events that have now created the need to get out onto the streets and keep this in the face of our society and government?
Well, thank you for letting me speak again, Mom. Just to try and put it in a bit of a personal narrative, it was 8 years ago, more than 8 now, when I got a call to tell me that Bazooka Radebe, who was the leader of the Amadiba Crisis Committee on the Kolobeni community, had been shot and killed with 8 bullets riddling his body. And it was probably the worst day of my professional life as a social worker who had all my life up to that point been seeking to support people with the Bill of Rights to enable and to ensure that their voices could be heard. And we were successful in doing that, which is precisely why they killed him. So he never called himself a whistleblower. He was simply an activist, but he was effectively blowing the whistle because he had told me a whole lot of stuff about the Kolobeni Mineral Sands project, what was going on behind the scenes, having previously been involved with the mining deal. I knew what was wrong there, and that was I was able to take my stand and stand my ground when we then found ourselves, a number of us, caught in a defamation slap suit, which lasted 7 years. That's been resolved. Now, I just share that personal narrative because it shows you that we are, in fact, making very good progress, and that I am, notwithstanding what happened all those years ago, actually feeling very hopeful now because the tide is changing. Whistleblowing is becoming fashionable, but we cannot afford to, in a sense, relax. And that's why I'm so pleased to hear that there's this mobilization again of civil society to hold the government's feet to the fire for all their promises. So I'm really encouraged by that, and I've got my own thoughts about what we can do and what needs to happen next.
And our reporter Zanika Mhlaba is there to also talk to some of those activists, some of those community members and leaders who are leading the charge in this march today. So we'll get those live updates from him as well. John, activists seeking to blow the lid on corruption where they live in communities all across our country, notwithstanding what you've just said in terms of progress, do so at a very high cost. They're often killed. Their family members are caught in the crossfire. They lose their income, they lose their reputations and their livelihoods. Share with us a little bit more on the consequences of this choice to speak out.
Well, yeah, I've got to be careful about how much I share because, of course, people have disclosed stuff to me, which is very personal. But all I can say in general terms, let's look at some good news stories. Because, we can curse the darkness, but it's important to light candles. We've seen the SARS actually recognize and acknowledge what was happening to whistleblowers and have been reinstated and been compensated in the reparations process. We're seeing the National Lotteries Commission doing that again. But as I look at through the reports and the psychological assessments and things like that have been done for those people, it is absolutely heartbreaking to see what they've had to endure. But for me, the real miracle is that notwithstanding that retaliation, they have prevailed. And they will continue to do so because things have got so bad. What alternative do you have? Now, these are people with children, with families, and they're wanting to be able to look their children in their face and say, look, I stood for a certain set of values and principles because I'm wanting this to do for your future. What I'm really thinking, however, is that if we're going to get it meaningfully, I don't actually have a lot of confidence in Parliament actually responding. We've been banging on that door now for 4 years, ever since Mandy Wiener's book came out. And I'm thinking that what needs to happen as a next step, because of how dire it is, for there to be a challenge to seek the judiciary to now compensate for where the legislature and the executive have failed, in the same way as we had with, the Hugh Glenister case with the Helen Suzman Foundation. And I think that what needs to now happen is litigation to hold the government's feet to the fire and to get the judiciary to now write the law that's going to happen. I mean, people make promises. Whistleblowing has become a topical thing for politicians. They all like to kind of show themselves to be alongside it. But the nature of our political system is that the truth about power is that you don't want the truth. So in a sense, almost asking for politicians to actually vote for a more rigorous protection, support, and accountability around whistleblowing is asking like turkeys to vote for Christmas, because they are beneficiaries of the silence and of the intimidation. So that's why I think we've got to look strategically. And I'd love to know what you think about it and what the media thinks, because I think that's what's going to happen. We've seen it happen before, and we need to do it again. Well,
look, we take our cue from people who are going through it, John, because we can make a lot of assumptions from the outside in. But it's when, as you've mentioned, colleagues write or people speak and our cameras are there and we hear the stories directly from the source, that the message reaches the place where it should reach. And I'd written this question for you, that the march today is not only about making a noise, it's also about pursuing a legal framework that legislates better for protection and compensation. And we're talking about things that you and I actually in previous discussions have talked about: Protected Disclosures Act, the Witness Protection Act, which we understand the Department of Justice is reviewing. I was going to ask whether we have what we need in law right now, but it sounds as if we are not quite there, and we need a different course of action that we need to pursue. As you say, this is to go and apply for direct access to the highest court in the land and to pursue litigation against this. So again, these are questions we can put to the justice complex around how that matter gets accelerated. Maybe if we can go to this. The Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime counted a total of, let's call it almost 2,000 assassination cases in South Africa between 2000 and 2021. And whistleblowers accounted for many of those individuals who were targeted. And the worry here is that there's too much to deter would-be whistleblowers, given the realities of what happens after. And the risk of silencing more and more people who would speak out is high, and it's there. But what you've said is, we can curse the darkness, but we should light a candle, and that it does seem as if the tide is turning. For people who are sitting where they are in their homes this morning, or in their office buildings, or however they're listening to our broadcast, thinking, I've got to say something, what's your message to them?
Well, in fact, Imam, you and I were in the studio together, we were talking about it. Koli and Nambi, your colleague, was, after my last appearance on Newzroom Afrika, a whistleblower called us, got in touch with us. And in the last number of weeks, I've been very excited to see how, through him coming forward, and I can't say who it was because we don't want to alert the villains to what's going on. All I can say, it was in a state-owned entity, and I was able to get in touch with the relevant minister responsible. I'm not saying who it is, and I'm not saying what party he's from. All I'm saying is that and it's now with the SIU, we managed to get support from getting investigative journalists onto the story. It's working. We're looking for a safe house for him to go to, so he'll be safe once the story breaks. So I just share that story, and I say, if there are any other people out there who are feeling intimidated, it's more the fear that actually intimidates than the reality. And once people start breaking that mold and transcending it, they suddenly find that the road rises up to meet them. And it is happening. And I have to just give credit to you and your colleagues at Newzroom Afrika, the championing. And I'm really actually looking forward to the next couple of weeks. Now, 2 years ago, I was in a state of absolute despair. And I really myself was feeling like I just can't go on. But now I'm feeling like the tide is turning. And I really do think that our Constitution does provide a means. And we've seen the precedent with what happened with the Hugh Glenister case. And I'm talking to the Legal Resources Centre to see if we can't actually initiate that. Unfortunately, what it's going to need is money. It's going to need big investment and support like they had in that case with the Helen Suzman Foundation. We need some big trust fund to say, come on, we're going to fund you and hopefully recover the costs when we start winning. Because, I mean, it's pushing on an open door as it comes to the judiciary. I mean, here's Judge Zonda, a former Chief Justice, and I'm pretty sure almost all of the current Constitutional Court judges would love to be able to, as it were, write the legislation and to actually protect whistleblowers, because that's the fireproofing us against state capture again and for the evisceration of our institutions like the Lotteries Commission, etc.
Yeah. You know, John, we always talk about the aftermath. We always talk about whistleblowers being brave. We talk about fortifying our legal framework to ensure that the right thing happens insofar as protection, but also compensation and making it right, the things that they lose also materially and otherwise. But the first cause here is the virus of corruption and malfeasance. And that should be stopped at inception. The lack of adherence with various laws that are supposed to inoculate the system from abuse, accounting and procurement officers who neglect or subvert the PFMA or the MFMA, and these are those accounting oversight mechanisms. Their role is to target states or other funds, and they don't seem to be enough. How primed are our country systems for abuse based on the number of people who come out and do something about it?
Well, interestingly, I mean, one has to take quite an analytical and academic and sort of research mindset about this and look at the evidence. I've been looking at some very interesting policy briefs and things like that coming out from the Institute for Security Studies. And what light has now come on is that in developing countries, the so-called principal agent theory of kind of good governance that is really comes from Western context actually is not really the most appropriate way of dealing with corruption in developing countries where there's massive inequality. And in that sense, what we have now is the worst of both worlds. We've got systemic corruption, and that means it's a way in which certain behavior is normalized. So you have people that are not evil or bad, just feel that the only way they can survive is to play this game. And then on top of that, you've got basically people who are greedy, who are smart, and who know how to exploit that vulnerability of people who just need to get on. And that's why it's been so difficult. And that's why there's been this strong retaliation and the murders happening, because these folk have connections to organized crime and all the rest, and they can do it. But what is interesting in that research is that they found that if you have individuals who simply stand their ground, who refuse to give in, that eventually becomes in itself a deterrent to those who think they can get away with it. Because even if they are martyred, I mean, the paradox of it is you can't kill a martyr. They're already dead. I mean, Bezuka Radebe lives on, even though he was killed. His family, his friends, they know they're not going to. Babita Deokaran's family live on. I mean, we're all going to die at some point. So I'm finding that, you know, it's important for us to ensure how have we lived? How have we as individuals lived? And what option and how do we make our choices for the better? And I believe that that's where it's going to rise from. I don't think we can see it coming from the top, from legislative things, particularly because power is in its nature prone to self-interest and self-preservation. We need to have people that go and run ahead of that political process and say, we're going to plant a flag here. We are going to say, this is what this country stands for. And if we can do it in the sporting fields and we can do it in our rugby teams, well, we can do it in our society as a whole.
John, on that note of valor, so to speak, thank you very much. We'll leave it there. There's a lot to think about in the way that you responded to that last question as well, that it isn't just one or two things. It really is an holistic approach that we need to take to the issue and the corrosive nature of corruption and whistleblowing as well in South Africa. Thank you for being with us this morning. Really, I do appreciate it. And this is